The land had forgotten the taste of rain. For nearly 3 years, the skies above Cedar Hollow had remained a dull, bleached gray, as if heaven itself had turned its back on the earth below. The air carried a dry stillness that pressed down on every roof, every field, every man and woman left in the fading town. Dust lay thick as sorrow on the main road, once called Prosper Street, now nothing more than a ribbon of cracked clay. Even the wind seemed tired. It moved slowly through the brittle corn stalks, whispering like an old man trying to recall a happier song. And in the middle of that dying land stood Evelyn Grace Turner, 22 years old and already feeling twice her age. Each morning, she rose before dawn, lighting the stove with trembling fingers, boiling what little coffee remained, and stepping out to tend the withered fields. The Turner farm had once been the pride of Cedar Hollow, her father's laughter echoing across acres of wheat, her mother humming hymns at the porch. But now the fields were just stubble and ghosts. Her father had gone to his rest 2 winters past, his heart failing after too many prayers unanswered. Her mother, Martha Turner, rarely spoke anymore. Evelyn had learned to fill silence with movement, hammering, digging, fixing, anything to keep from listening to the emptiness. That morning, as she leaned on her shovel and squinted toward the horizon, she saw a shape moving through the heat haze. A man on horseback, coming slow and steady down the old west road, where no stranger had passed in months. He rode tall despite the wear of travel, coat faded to the color of desert bark, hat pulled low. His horse was thin but sure-footed, its mane streaked with dust. Evelyn frowned. Travelers meant trouble more often than not these days, thieves, beggars, or worse. Still, something in the rhythm of his ride, calm and unhurried, gave her pause. She stayed where she was, hand shading her eyes, until he drew close enough for her to see the lines of his face, sharp, weathered, but not cruel. He stopped by the fence, tipped his hat. "Morning, ma'am." His voice was low, gravelly, carrying a weariness that seemed to match the land. Evelyn nodded cautiously. "Morning. You lost." "Not lost," he said after a moment. "Just between places." He glanced toward the empty barn. "Name's Luke Carver. Been riding 3 days without water." Didn't mean to intrude. Evelyn hesitated. The polite thing was to offer him a drink, but water was precious. Still, she saw the exhaustion in the man's posture, the way his shoulders sagged as if the weight of more than dust pressed upon them. "You can water your horse by the well," she said finally. "But it's weak. Don't drain it dry." Luke nodded with quiet gratitude. He dismounted slowly, patting his horse's neck. "Much obliged." As he walked toward the well, Evelyn followed at a distance. There was something about him, a quiet kind of sadness that mirrored her own. His hands were calloused, his movements careful, as though he'd done more work than talking in his life. When he finished, he turned to her. "Don't suppose you'd sell a meal to a hungry man, miss?" Evelyn hesitated again, then sighed. "You can eat what we have. It's not much." Inside the small farmhouse, the air smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Martha sat by the window, her gray hair pinned loosely, her eyes distant. Evelyn set a pot of beans on the stove and tore 2 pieces of bread. Luke removed his hat, stood quietly near the door. "Ma'am," he said softly to Martha. She nodded without looking up. They ate in near silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room. After a while, Evelyn asked, "Where you headed, Mr. Carver?" He chewed slowly before answering. "Nowhere particular. Used to work the rail line east of Abilene. When the company folded, I kept moving. Guess I'm looking for something I lost along the way." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What'd you lose?" He gave a faint, crooked smile. "That's the thing about losing. Sometimes you don't know until you find it again." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than she intended. Something in his tone, quiet and honest, reached through the walls she'd built around her heart. When the meal was done, she said, "You can sleep in the barn tonight. There's hay left. I can't pay you, but if you're willing to work, I could use help fixing fences." Luke nodded. "I'll earn my keep. Thank you, Miss Turner." As he stepped out into the cooling dusk, Evelyn watched him through the window. The sky was burning gold, clouds gathering at the edge of the horizon, a rare sight. For a moment, she thought she smelled rain. That night, Luke lay in the barn, staring up through cracks in the roof at the stars. He reached into his coat and took out a small silver harmonica, turning it in his hands. It caught the faint moonlight, a reminder of another life, another place. He pressed it to his lips and played a tune, low and haunting, that drifted across the dry fields like wind through grass. Inside the farmhouse, Evelyn paused in her room. She recognized the sound, sad, but alive. It filled the hollow places where silence had lived for too long. Her mother stirred for the first time in hours. "Who's playing?" Martha whispered. Evelyn smiled faintly. "The drifter." Outside, the sky rumbled faintly. A single flash of lightning stitched the horizon. By dawn, the air smelled different, not rain yet, but something close. Evelyn stepped out to find Luke already awake, patching a broken fence with steady hands. "You start early," she said. He looked up with a faint smile. "Old habit. Mornings are when the world feels most honest." They worked side by side for hours, nailing boards, tightening wire, saying little. Yet every silence between them felt less heavy. As the day wore on, the horizon darkened again, not with dust but with clouds, real clouds. The kind that carried water and thunder and life. Evelyn stopped and stared, disbelief and hope mixing in her chest. Luke followed her gaze. "Looks like the sky's remembering us," he murmured. And then, almost shyly, a single drop of rain landed on her cheek. She blinked, laughed softly, the first laugh she'd made in months. Luke smiled too, though his eyes held something deeper, awe, maybe even guilt, as though the miracle wasn't meant for him. The drizzle lasted only minutes, but when it stopped, the scent of earth rose from the ground, sweet, damp, alive. Evelyn turned to him. "Maybe you brought it," she said half teasing. He shook his head slowly. "No, miss. I just happened to ride in when the sky decided to forgive us." But as he spoke, thunder rolled again in the far distance, and for the first time in a long time, Cedar Hollow dared to believe the drought might end. The rain that fell that night did not last, but it left behind something unseen, a whisper of promise that settled into the soil and into the hearts of those who still dared to hope. For the next few days, Luke Carver worked from dawn until dusk. He patched fences, hauled water from the well, and mended the old irrigation lines that had long fallen silent. The earth remained dry, but he spoke of it like an old friend, telling Evelyn how the ground never truly died, it only slept, waiting for someone stubborn enough to wake it. Evelyn found herself listening more than she meant to. Luke didn't talk like other men she'd known. He didn't complain about the heat or curse the wind. He worked with a quiet patience that seemed almost reverent. Sometimes he hummed tunes beneath his breath, old songs, full of longing and miles. Each evening, when the sky turned copper, he'd take his horse, Ash, down to the riverbed, now nothing but cracked mud, and walk its length in silence. She once asked him why. "I like hearing what the world isn't saying," he'd replied. She didn't understand it then, but she remembered the words. A town suspicious of miracles. By the end of the week, Cedar Hollow had begun to notice the stranger. The general store's porch became a place of whispered judgment. "That drifter's still stayin' at the Turner place," muttered old Benton Reeves, whose dry goods business had suffered more from his sourness than the drought. "He's trouble, I tell you," said Clara May, the preacher's wife. "Comes out of nowhere, brings rain behind him, ain't natural." Only one man spoke differently, Sheriff Amos Lee, who sat with his boots crossed, squinting against the sun. "Folks talk too much," he said quietly. "Man swings a hammer and fixes fences, that's more help than half this town's done in a year. But gossip is a kind of drought, too. It dries trust as quick as heat dries water." Evelyn felt the weight of those whispers every time she went to town for flour or nails. She saw the sideways glances, the tight smiles. She pretended not to hear, but they followed her home like dust. That evening, as she fed the chickens, she said quietly, "People are talking." Luke, stacking wood near the porch, paused. "They always do. It's not fair," she said. "You've done more good here in a week than most of them in a year." He gave a half smile. "Don't waste breath defending me. I've had worse said by better people." Something in the way he said it, calm but heavy, told her he meant it. The weight of memory. That night, the wind carried a chill. Evelyn woke to the sound of low thunder and found Luke sitting by the barn door, staring out across the fields. The lantern beside him flickered, casting long shadows over his face. He held the harmonica again, but he wasn't playing, just turning it slowly in his hands. "You don't sleep much," she said from the doorway. He glanced up. "Sleep and I don't get along. Every time I close my eyes, the past starts talking." She stepped closer, wrapping her shawl tighter. You talk about the past like it's a person. He gave a quiet laugh, more breath than sound. Sometimes it feels that way. After a long pause, he said, I used to have a brother. Name was Daniel, younger by 2 years, smart, reckless, had a laugh that could chase away the worst kind of day. We worked the railroads together. Thought we'd make something of ourselves. Then came the fire. Evelyn waited, the night wind brushing her hair. Wasn't his fault, Luke said softly. The foreman had us hauling dynamite through a canyon line. Heat got too high, caught a spark. Daniel tried to stop it. I pulled him out, but he stopped. After that, I just kept walking. Been walking ever since. She didn't know what to say. So she simply said, I'm sorry. He nodded, looking out into the darkness. Nothing to be sorry for. We all lose something. Some of us just never find the road back. The lantern light caught in his eyes, not tears, but the shimmer of memory. Evelyn wanted to ask more, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, she said, you should play something. The wind could use a song tonight. He smiled faintly and raised the harmonica to his lips. The melody was soft, aching, full of spaces that felt like prayers. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a moment, the farm didn't feel so empty. A lesson in hope. The next morning, the sky was pale gold, the air heavy with that uncertain stillness that comes before change. Luke found Evelyn standing by the field, holding a small cloth bundle. What's that? He asked. Seeds, she said. My father kept them. Wheat mostly. He used to say a seed doesn't die, it just waits. Luke smiled. Smart man. He planted the last batch before the drought. Nothing grew. My mother says it's foolish to waste what's left. But I can't just let them sit in the dark. She knelt and dug her fingers into the dry earth, pressing a few seeds into the cracks. Dust clung to her skin, but she didn't stop. Luke watched silently, then knelt beside her. Let me help. Together they planted row after row, tiny gestures of defiance against the barren ground. At one point, Evelyn looked up and said, half laughing, we're planting hope in dust. Luke nodded. That's the only place it grows. They worked until the sun dipped low. Sweat streaked their faces, hands raw, but neither wanted to stop. When they finally rose, the field looked no different, still brown, still broken, yet something inside her had shifted. The act itself felt sacred. That evening, as she washed her hands at the pump, her mother spoke softly from the porch. Your father would have been proud. Evelyn looked up, startled. It was the first time Martha had spoken more than a few words in weeks. Luke, hearing from the barn, smiled quietly to himself. Firelight and laughter. Later that night, Evelyn brought 2 tin cups of coffee to the barn. Luke sat by a small fire, sharpening his old pocketknife. She handed him a cup and sat nearby. Tell me something, she said. Why do you keep moving? Don't you ever want to stop somewhere? He stared into the flames for a long moment. Once, I thought staying meant safety. But the longer I stayed in one place, the more ghosts caught up. So I figured if I kept moving, they couldn't find me. Do you still believe that? He looked at her, eyes reflecting firelight. Not tonight. The air between them grew soft, filled with the crackle of wood and the scent of dust and smoke. Evelyn laughed suddenly, not forced, but free. What's funny? He asked. You, she said. You fix fences like a preacher mending souls, talk like a poet, and act like you've got no right to either. Luke chuckled, a rare, warm sound. Guess I'm all mixed up, then. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, she said. For a moment, their eyes met, steady, unguarded. Then she looked away, heart beating too fast. Outside, the night deepened. The stars burned bright, and somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled faintly again. The first signs. By week's end, the air had changed. The mornings were cool again, the wind carried moisture. The well, once whispering at the bottom, now murmured faintly, fuller than before. Luke noticed small things, the way Evelyn smiled more easily, the way her mother hummed old hymns again while hanging clothes. Even the animals seemed livelier. One evening, Luke walked to the edge of the field they'd planted. A thin green sprout had broken through the dust, fragile, trembling, but alive. He called out, Evelyn, you'd best come see this. She ran out, hair loose, eyes wide. When she saw the small shoot, she knelt down, covering her mouth with her hands. It's growing, she whispered. Luke nodded, smiling faintly. Told you. Earth never forgets. Evelyn looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes, not from sadness but wonder. Thank you, Luke. He shook his head. Don't thank me. I just helped you see what was already there. But deep inside, something stirred in him too, something he thought had died with his brother. A sense of belonging, of redemption. As they stood side by side in the twilight, the horizon glowed with the promise of another storm. It would not come that night, but it was coming, he could feel it. And for the first time in many years, Luke Carver believed that maybe, just maybe, the road ahead was leading him home. Morning came with the smell of damp air and the hum of bees, a sound Cedar Hollow hadn't heard in years. The small green shoots in the Turner field caught the sunlight like bits of glass, trembling in the breeze. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, the land looked alive. Luke Carver stood by the fence, his hat low over his eyes, watching Evelyn move through the rows. She knelt to check each tender stalk as though greeting a friend, her hands gentle, reverent. You'd think they were made of gold, he said softly. Evelyn looked up and smiled. They are to me. Luke returned her smile, though something flickered behind his eyes, a shadow of worry. Hope had a way of demanding things from a man. The town awakens. Word spread fast. By midweek, half the town had wandered to the Turner farm to see the miracle for themselves. Men removed their hats, women murmured prayers, children laughed and ran barefoot through the furrows. Old Benton Reeves, the grocer, squinted at Luke suspiciously. You bring that rain with you, stranger. Luke shrugged. If I did, it'd be nice to know how to keep it coming. The sheriff, Amos Lee, smiled faintly. Well, whoever's responsible, I ain't complaining. Folks around here could use something to believe in again. He turned to Luke. You planning to stay long? Luke hesitated. Long enough to finish what I started. Fair enough, the sheriff said. But in his eyes lingered curiosity, and a hint of concern, as though he recognized the kind of man who didn't stay anywhere for too long. The first rainstorm. 2 nights later, the storm finally came. It began as a whisper, a low rumble beyond the hills, a cool wind pushing through the dry heat. Then the clouds rolled in, heavy and bruised with thunder. Evelyn and Luke stood on the porch as the first drops fell, fat and dark against the dust. Within minutes, the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking the parched ground, turning the yard into mud and the fields into a shimmer of life. Evelyn laughed aloud, spinning beneath the storm, her dress clinging to her knees, her hair plastered to her face. Luke watched her, a smile tugging at his mouth. Something inside him broke open, the kind of breaking that mends instead of wounds. He stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the mud. Come on, she called, her voice bright over the thunder. He hesitated, then walked toward her, rain streaming down his face. They stood together in the field, laughing like children, their voices lost in the roar of the storm. Evelyn threw her arms wide, shouting into the sky, "We're alive." Luke's laughter joined hers, deep and rough, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. From the farmhouse porch, Martha watched them through the rain, tears mixing with the water on her cheeks. God bless that man, she whispered. When the storm finally passed, the air smelled of wet earth and clover. Puddles reflected the sky, and the world felt scrubbed clean. After the rain, the next morning, the town was changed. Men began clearing ditches, women swept their porches, and children chased frogs in the puddles. The blacksmith reopened his shop, the church bells rang again, and laughter returned to the saloon. They called Luke the man who brought spring. He hated the title, though he never said so aloud. He knew better than anyone how easily faith could turn to blame if the rain stopped again. Still, he worked beside Evelyn every day, repairing tools, tending sprouts, mending fences that the storm had knocked loose. Sometimes they didn't speak for hours. They didn't need to. The rhythm of shared work was its own language. One evening, as the sun set over the soaked fields, Luke sat on the porch steps cleaning his revolver. Evelyn joined him, handing him a cloth. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "What's that?" "The road. Wandering. Not knowing where you'll end up." Luke thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. The road's honest, it only gives what you take from it. But lately," he looked toward the fields. "Lately, I don't feel so empty when I stop moving." Evelyn smiled. "Then maybe you've found what you lost." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "Maybe I have. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, not like lightning, but like the quiet hum that comes after it. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Evenin', folks," called Sheriff Lee from the gate. "Mind if I step up?" Luke nodded. "Sure thing, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" The sheriff removed his hat. "Riders came through from the east this morning," said a marshal's following a trail, looking for a man named Luke Carver. Evelyn stiffened. "What for?" "Don't rightly know," Lee said carefully. "Talk is, there was a payroll robbery near Abilene 2 years back. Marshal Dawson's been hunting the man who did it." Luke's hands stilled on the revolver. "And he thinks I'm that man." "Could be," the sheriff said. "Could be he's wrong. But he's comin' this way, and I figured you'd best know." Silence settled between them. The only sound was the creak of the porch in the cooling wind. Finally Luke said quietly, "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll handle it." The sheriff nodded, his gaze steady. "You seem like a decent man, Carver. I'd like to think you're not the one he's after. But I'll tell you plain, when a lawman comes calling, you'd better have your story straight." With that, he tipped his hat and rode off into the dusk. The ghost returns. After he was gone, Evelyn turned to Luke. "Is it true?" He didn't answer at first. The harmonica in his pocket felt suddenly heavy. "Part of it," he said finally. "My brother Daniel took that payroll train. He was sick, dying, thought he could buy medicine, maybe save himself. I found him after the fire, before the law did. He begged me to take the blame, to run. Said no one would believe he was sorry. He looked away, jaw tight. I buried him myself. Been running ever since." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Luke, you shouldn't have to carry that." He laughed softly, bitterly. "Don't much matter what I should or shouldn't. The world's already decided who I am." "Not this world," she said firmly. "Not here." Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it, the same steel that kept her alive through every drought and disappointment. Luke met her gaze. "You believe I'm not the man he's looking for?" "I don't have to believe," she said. "I know." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was filled with unspoken things, regret, trust, and the fragile hope of something more. Then Luke said quietly, "When the marshal comes, I'll face him. I've run enough." Evelyn reached out, resting her hand on his arm. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." A town divided. News spread faster than wind through dry grass. By the next morning, everyone in Cedar Hollow knew that a lawman was coming, and that the drifter who'd brought the rain might not be the saint they'd imagined. Some turned cold again. Benton Reeves told anyone who'd listened that the rain was the devil's bargain. Others stood firm, the preacher, the blacksmith, the sheriff. "He's done more good here than most of us ever have," Amos Lee told the town. "Judge a man by his deeds, not by what someone else says he did." Evelyn worked harder than ever, refusing to be seen in the shadows of doubt. The sprouts in her field had grown taller, greener, and she swore she could hear them whispering in the wind, "Don't give up." The calm before the storm. That night, Luke sat by the barn fire again, harmonica in hand. Evelyn joined him, and for a long time, they said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "Do you ever think some people are sent to places for a reason?" Luke smiled faintly. "You mean like rain showing up in the desert?" "Something like that," she said. He played a slow, tender tune, one she hadn't heard before. It rose and fell like a prayer carried on the wind. When he finished, she whispered, "What's it called?" He shrugged. "Never gave it a name." "Maybe you should." She thought for a moment. "Hope." He smiled. "Sounds about right." The moon rose over the wet fields, casting silver light across the rows of young green. The world was quiet, waiting, not with fear this time, but with the deep stillness that comes just before the next change. Luke looked at Evelyn, and in her eyes he saw the same thing he'd seen in the horizon after the storm, a reason to stop running. But far away, beyond the hills, a horse's hooves echoed through the night, steady, relentless. Marshal Dawson was coming, and with him rode the reckoning Luke Carver could no longer avoid.